Welcome to Crafty to Happy podcast, a special series on our Sacred Stories podcast dedicated to sharing the incredible stories of grit, grace, and love in our new book, Crafty to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy. I am your host, Rev Ariel Patricia, and together we will answer the question, do bad things happen to good people, or could the difficulties we face be gifts in disguise? Today we are speaking with Dr. Julie Krull, whose story in Crafty to Happy is titled An Epic Healing Journey. Dr. Krull is a founding steward of goodofthewhole.com. She hosts the Dr. Julie Show, All Things Connected, and is the author of the #1 international best-selling and Nautilus award-winning book, Fractured Grace. And so it is my delight to say, welcome Dr. Julie Krull to Crafty to Happy.
Oh, thank you, Rev Ariel. It's really a delight to be here with you, especially with you. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you because not only do I admire the work that you do, with your show, with Good of the Whole, with your incredible book, Fractured Grace, all of that, but the story that you have in Crafty to Happy, I would say, is probably one of my absolute favorites, and it takes me, and I'm sure everyone, to a place that is a place that you just kind of want to, I think, rest in. I think of it almost as like a resting place when I read your story.
Thank you. That story, I have to tell you, it's a very special story to me as well. And the story wrote itself in real time. So it is really precious. And yet, I think that the power comes in that you hear the voice of death. I think the thing that makes it special for me, Ariel, is that it's my father's delirium speaking that bringing these really sweet moments. And it's bittersweet, right? Because it's his death story. He's on his deathbed. But what comes through him during those moments were so moving and sweet. And maybe I could give you a few examples of that, but it's like, I don't know about you, but that's the part of the story that you're resting in this, wow, how do you say that? It's like that universal quality of life and death, but yet those bittersweet moments that kind of elevate and transcend that death story, the crappy part of the death story, right? And bring us back and resolve that pain and that heavy into this lightness. There's just some really sweet moments in that story.
You bring them out really beautifully. And for our listeners, Julie's story, An Epic Healing Journey, happens in one night. And it is, as she says, the night that her father transitions. And the way that you write, Julie, what really comes through in your story more than anything, and that's why I feel like you rest in it, is just this space between time. It feels like there's this peace, even though your father is at times, struggling, right? He had trouble breathing or different things, but then he'll just tell you he loves you, and he'll settle back down, and you'll settle back down, and it's just so beautiful. You can feel almost as if you can touch it in your hands, the connection and the love between you and your father.
Thank you. I just as you spoke those words about reading that story, it brings me back to that moment so clearly. Like, as the story wrote itself, it was this timeless place. So thank you for recognizing that. It was this gentle, it was grace, grit, and love. That's what I really appreciate about how we're describing some of these stories, because all of that is there in that story, in those 24 hours, just like you mentioned, that grace, that grit, and the love.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's really special about it is, my father passed about 15 years ago. I wasn't with him when he passed. He was just with my mother. And I knew the last time that I left him that I wouldn't see him again. I just knew it. And I prepared myself for that. And I deferred in a lot of ways to my mother in her relationship with him, to be with him and really the only one with him. And she had a very beautiful, loving experience with my father when he passed. And that felt like it was the perfect way, because they really were on their journey together, and they had gone through so much with his illness together. But when I read a story like yours, and I'm sure many listeners can identify with this, it's it's always that, it's kind of a question, like, what would that be like? And I think of it as such an honor, I think, to be able to be a witness with someone as they transition, between the lives. And I haven't experienced it, with a parent, and I know many people haven't. So I guess where I'm trying to go with this is that there's so much in the story. There's everything about you and your father and the love and his process. And then there's our stories, there's the rest of us looking on, the ones that have experienced it and the ones that haven't, that have a sense of wonder or questions around it. Does that make sense? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, thank you. The piece about those who haven't experienced it, it really is a place for most of humanity that we're curious about, and what's happened in our culture is we're so taught to fear that experience, to fear death, to fear loss, and we associate so much pain with it, right? So with the story that wrote through me during my father's last 24 hours really was this: number one, I went down there fully knowing he was going to die. We literally drove him from Denver back to Utah, where he lived, to die. He left the hospital and made the choice, and we knew it would be really fast, because his choice was to stay in the hospital and die and maybe have a couple months, or go home and die and have no more blood transfusions that were keeping him alive. So I had a friend that I was really close to at the time that said, Julie, remember that we're all, our culture around death is to hide it. Our culture is to fear it, and to make it be a taboo instead of making it be a celebration and making it be a part of life. Like, death is a part of life. Just like I'm looking at my window and the trees are turning orange and yellow and red, and the leaves are falling off, and the season is ending and we're going into winter. And that's a part of life. And yet it's a beautiful part of life. It's a beautiful season. And it's not my favorite to go into fall, going into winter. So I went in there really mindfully to be conscious, to be aware, to pay attention, to really be present for my three sisters and stepmom in a way that we could really honor the death process, honor the dying, and not in a way that we all say our goodbyes and hold his hand, but to really speak that truth, be in our relationships fully, be who we are, and not just have it be an honor to be by my father's side holding his hand, but to be a part of our relationships, be a part of who we were as a family, and go through that epic healing journey together. And so the piece that to me was so powerful too is that my dad didn't transition quickly. There were some lessons that happened. When he went into his last stage, hospice came in and said, okay, it's just, it's a matter of time now, maybe a couple hours at the most. And that stage started an 11-hour epic journey. And some of my most, what would I say, my most profound lessons from that epic journey stay with me today about life, about relationships, about love, about so many things as I sat by his bedside. And that epic healing journey that I talked about really was the primary story of where my mind was and what level of consciousness I wanted to be witnessing from. And that in itself was so healing to me that when I would get caught up in my pain or my fear or my frustration or my fatigue, it was easy then to step away and go, oh, this is death, and he's going through his own healing journey right now. This is a transcendent space. So yeah, and boy, there's lots of lessons there.
It's, to me, it takes such an incredible amount of love, right? Love for the other person. But I also think, you mentioned the presence. And I think that so interesting because, right, there's a difference between saying goodbyes and almost making it not about us, but in a way, you know what I mean, that we're saying goodbye and how we feel about something. And then I think showing up as a witness to another person because it's their journey and their transition as well, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? So that you were able to do that and have the presence to do that and to hold that space I think is just such a beautiful example of how this process can be and how, and what people can experience in it, and to remove some of the fear around the unknown,
Yeah. Yeah, the fear of the unknown is a huge piece, Ariel, that a lot of people literally shut down in that fear. We constrict with fear. And so inviting ourselves to open to the beauty and literally to the grace and the joy and the love part of this story, because I did get pulled into the suffering for a while. I write about that in my story. And I went from the tender moments of my dad. I love some of the quotes, like when I asked him, I repositioned him and asked him if he was okay. And he said, oh, it's good. It's good until it's not. Like there were some funny things. The other one I love was when I asked him if he went pain medicine, and they really wanted us to keep him comfortable, and they wanted him on morphine and the drugs they were giving him. And he wouldn't take it. And when in the middle of the night, I said, hey, Dad, how about some pain medicine? And he goes, oh, no, it hurts more everywhere than anywhere. And it was like these beautiful little messages that came through when he was still coherent. But then there's that time where the incoherence is there. He was not able to communicate. He was in pain. And like you had mentioned, every breath, it was like this marathon journey that it was like, okay, this is going to be his last breath. And then he would struggle for one more. And so that part of the unknowing, it's like watching life end and not put our own definitions onto what it should be like, or what we want it to be like, or what we read about from other people. Because I think that would be one of the most important pieces that I would teach others is we read stories and people are like, oh, did the room fill up with angels and light? Or, oh, did he come? Or, it's like we read these stories and then those are what we want, or that we think we should have if we're going to be in that room. And my mother died very quickly this summer, unexpectedly. And so this story of my father's was from 2014, and my mother passed in June of this year, and her death was very different. And she was in an emergency room by herself, all alone. Mm-hmm. And by the time my sisters could get there, she was already gone. They were choosing to take her off life support, and I was too far away to get there. And so it would have been beautiful to have those moments with my mom, and I didn't. And I have to trust that story between my mom and I and her death is a different kind of story that reveals a different kind of grace and grit and love, So yeah, back to your, that unknowing and who we are, and a lot of times what we avoid as a culture. It's really important for us to open to the magic and the mystery and really the soul's journey on a much deeper level than our humanity and our human journey.
I'm sorry to hear about your mom. I know she had passed, and but I guess my first opportunity that I can, that I'm articulating that I'm sorry about your mom, and I know that sounds like it was quite a shock and quite a difference, like you said, a different experience. I appreciate you bringing it up though, Julie, because I think that, so having this conversation, what my hope is that others can listen to it and they can receive what they need from it, and whether it's courage, whether it's hope, whether it's peace of mind, because many people do pass in a traumatic way or by themselves, or, not within the peace and comfort and arms of loved ones like your dad did, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think of that sometimes as well. I think of that and I wonder why the experiences are different, or do we just trust that it is the soul's journey, and that was the right journey for your mom, and the one that your father had was the right journey for him. What would you say to others, and how do you reconcile that within yourself as well?
Oh, thank you. What a powerful question. Wow. When you were asking that, I was thinking about how similar, and I write this in my story in Crappy to Happy, is it becomes a birth, right? My dad, I compared it to the birth of my son and my labor pains and what I was going through. And my son literally I was pushing for 2 hours before the doctor stepped in and said, we need to use forceps, and it's time. And there was that intervention. And so I was thinking about our birth stories are so different. And there's beautiful research about literally how our birth stories, how babies come in, really, whether that informs their personality or their personality is informing their birth story. But if you go back and you look at individual birth stories, it does give amazing clues to personality and life. And so, like, I just had 3 grandbabies within 3 months last year, which is fascinating. And each one of their birth stories was so different. 2 of them were very, very fast, and one of them was very, very long. So one was like my dad's death. And I got to spend 7 days with my father, his last 7 days on that journey. I spent other days with him in the hospital, but when we left from the hospital and took him home, we were there that long. And my mother, like I said, I was not there. And so I'm wondering, like, as you said that, I'm thinking about birth stories, and I imagine that those stories are a part of their soul's journey. I think that our death experience, and with each, my mother and my father, I can make sense of those death stories with who they were, and their life and their relationships and their how they showed up in life. There are a lot of fascinating lessons as I do contemplate that. My mom's story, it is sad that she was in an emergency room and wasn't surrounded by her loved ones, but also she didn't suffer. I mean, she was suffering. She got sick and she was suffering for a few days. Nobody knew how bad she was really suffering. And then went into the emergency room and died. Like literally, it was really, really fast. And the doctors who knew us called, I was there, and they called me, and they were sorting through what to do and sharing the details. And because they knew me personally and had a relationship with me, they were really sad about that. They're like, felt responsible that they couldn't keep her alive long enough for me to get there. It was so sweet that they had that emotional response as well. But I do think I do think you and I are both real spiritual and into the soul care of humanity here. And I do believe that it really was a signature of my mother's soul to pass that way at that time. And the same with my father. And the longer time passes, the more that time passes, the more I do see the sweetness in each one of those departures.
Mm. It's such an incredible gift, Julie, that you are sharing, with all of us, because, we all have people that we love, and we all have people that we have that have passed. And so, and as you said, everyone has a different story, and it looks different for everyone. So, I mean, I take really great comfort, and I think so many people do, by your experiences and by your words, and the depth of of presence and that you bring to it. It's really special because I know that how people pass affects the families greatly, and I believe that anyone listening to this conversation can draw a little bit more peace and a little bit more comfort, regardless of how their loved ones have passed, whatever the situation was.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thinking about, we hear so often with the COVID-19 pandemic and how, people were passing in isolation. I would never want to put the word out there that cruelty or that isolation would be a part of someone's story that they would choose in a way that makes people feel uncomfortable. But when we layer down into their soul's journey, I think we can find greater meaning for ourselves and them, because obviously separation is difficult, and to know your loved one perhaps on a ventilator, turned upside down, all alone, the stories are horrible of how people have been passing. And yet our discomfort, our understanding of what we would want for our loved ones sometimes is the greatest hurdle that we have to just be in that place of witnessing and mindfulness and go, okay, it's really hard to say our soul chose this. A lot of people don't want to hear that message. It's not an easy message, but in my opinion, everything in life can be looked at from that deeper meaning and from the soul's perspective and enrich our lives. And I think that's the whole message of Crappy to Happy, is once we really peel back those layers and be fully present to our own hearts and our own experience of love and grace and grit in that moment, and allow ourselves into that vulnerability, that's when we get to the other side of it, like the book shows. It's like, you can't go around, you have to go through.
We have to go through. That is true. And stories such as yours and the others in the book, Crappy to Happy, I believe are guideposts. And that's why it's just such an honor to work with you and to work with the other authors in the book and to create a book like Crappy to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy, because I do believe that is what people will receive. That is exactly. Last question, well, maybe not last, but question that I know you've answered it to some degree, Julie, and we're speaking with Dr. Julie Krull about her story, An Epic Healing Journey. But Julie, what would you say to anyone who is fearful, whether it is their own passing or or being present for the passing of another? Because I know many people with elderly parents, and I know others that are very fearful. They're very fearful of just death, or being present for someone as they transition. And so, in addition to what you've already shared, how did you draw your strength in order to go through that process? And what would you share with others?
Well, I think the two parts of the fear is, number one, pain and suffering, and number two, separation. And those are two very real pieces of death and dying, very real. We go through pain and suffering, and we go through separation. And so for me, I've endured the pain and suffering in my life. We all have stories of pain and suffering, and we do get through that. And for me, the only way through that is to really look for the joy, look for the transformation, look for the message, look for the growth. And so again, that's the spiritual journey part of the pain and suffering. We don't want anybody to go through pain and suffering, especially our loved ones. And so that's the one piece that I think is important. And then the other piece to navigate is that separation. And without a faith or an understanding of where do they go, what happens, we look at the finality and they're just not present in our life. And from that consciousness of separation, like they're here, they're not, it's done, that creates more pain and suffering. But if we can really look at our true nature, the true nature of reality, where everything is so interconnected, that we literally are a part of one unified field of consciousness, and life doesn't end, it transitions. So it's kind of like that transformation and joy that we were talking about. It's like life transitions into the next expression. So our loved ones aren't really gone. They've transitioned in whatever understanding. It's usually a religious or spiritual understanding of death. When you have that piece of understanding, you can have the peace of heart on the inside. And I think that's an important part of that. So I think, thanks for asking that, Reverend Ariel. I think of the pain and suffering and the separation as the two distinct things we fear. And this is the psychologist speaking, not the daughter who just lost her parents. But as the daughter that lost her parents, I can attest to that. And just one more piece I drop in here is, one of the most important pieces of consciousness that informed my experience, that a lot of people have and a lot of people don't have, is that I did have an early childhood near-death experience. So what I experienced during that time has informed so much of my life from that moment forward. So I had a different understanding of death from a very young age. And I think that finding others who have survived that is one beautiful prescription for those out there that are still struggling or wondering or fearful or anxious, is to go talk to someone who's gone through a near-death experience, or go pick up Crappy to Happy. You're going to hear some beautiful stories of transformation there. But there are many authors out there who are now talking about these things and bringing a normalcy, a normality to these mystical experiences, these very metaphysical things that have happened that it's difficult to put into words. So I think that having that foundation of looking beyond the surface into the depths really will help to quell the anxiety and the fear.
Listeners, you've been listening to Dr. Julie Krull, and we're speaking about her story in Crappy to Happy, an epic healing journey, which is the 24-hour period during the time of her father's passing. And we've also been speaking about the unexpected passing of her mother, and a very different experience with her mom. Julie, and listeners, I think you can see, just the depth and the heart and the wisdom and the love that Dr. Julie Krull shares. And she does this is her. And she does it through goodofthewhole.com. She does it through the Dr. Julie Show, All Things Connected, which is her radio show. She does it through her #1 international bestselling and Nautilus award-winning book, Fractured Grace, and a number of other. Julie, you're just involved in so many things, producing so many shows, and helping assist so many people kind of get the good news out, or deepen into the experience of I believe of our being human. Would you like to take a moment and share with the listeners anything specific, any ways that what you'd like them to, other ways to find you, or other things you have coming up, or a final message for our listeners?
I will take the opportunity for one final message that emerged in my awareness when you were summarizing that, Ariel, is that right now we're living in uncertain times on the planet, and there's a lot of death. We are literally hospicing so many systems and structures that are breaking down on the planet. And that in itself, this is what the book Fractured Grace is about, is really understanding, not just on a personal level, our health and healing and the death story that we're talking about, but on a cultural and planetary level. So many things are happening, and just the messages that these systems and structures, whether it be healthcare, governance, politics, we could go on and on, education, we can look at every system and structure on the planet that's breaking down and perhaps dying, if you would say, that it's doing that in order for the emergence of something brand new that's coming. That there are so many beautiful initiatives and movements, organizations on the planet that are poised and ready with beautiful solutions that support us in a higher level of who we are in our humanity, in our divine humanity, as some would say, this universal human. And so using that same heart and love and grace and grit that we were talking about with this death story, imagine that same dynamic happening on the planet, and that we are in good hands. And there are so many on the planet right here with beautiful solutions, amazing new whole systems, structures that are based in health and wholeness and love, and that literally a leadership of heart-centered stewards of our planet and all humanity is right here, maybe underneath the surface. You can't see it right now, because if you look at mainstream media, you're not going to see it, but it's right here. And I just want to leave our listeners with that sense of hope that we are all going through a real tumultuous time, but at the same time, we're hospicing this dying regime of the planet we built around an illusion of separation. We are also midwifing the birth of a new earth, a new world, a new culture of love and connection and healing and wholeness. And so look a little deeper. And if you have questions about that, or you're wondering about that, I would be happy to talk to you more. You could find me at juliekrull.com or gotothewhole.org. So thank you for that opportunity, Ariel.
Oh, Julie, thank you. Thank you for bringing it, kind of to our current situation, and leaving us with that hope and the parallels between the story you shared in Crappy to Happy and what's happening in the larger world today it's incredible. So thank you for bringing that. And it's Julie Krull. It's JulieKrull.com. You can find Dr. Julie Krull, and again, her show is the Dr. Julie Krull Show, All Things Connected. This has been such an incredible pleasure. I feel like Julie, I feel like I'm back in that resting place. When I talk with you, you just have such a presence about you that I do. And I think the listeners, I know that they're nodding their heads, that we are, it's that place where I think we feel, what's the word? It's not even a safe. It's more like held. We feel held. There's a space that we feel held and we can rest. And that's how I feel when I speak to you. And that's how I feel when I read your story, An Epic Healing Journey. So Dr. Julie Krull, thank you so very much.
Thank you. And I love that image of being held. And so thank you for that gift, giving that back to me. And we're all in this together. Let us hold one another. So thank you for letting me share my story, Reverend Ariel. I really appreciate being here with you today. It was beautiful, and I feel held by you as well. Thank you.
Oh, that makes me really happy. And listeners, I hope you all feel held as well. And you've been listening to Dr. Julie Krull. She's been sharing her story, An Epic Healing Journey, that she shared in our new book, Crappy to Happy, Sacred Stories of Transformational Joy, which is available through Amazon and booksellers worldwide, or direct through Sacred Stories Publishing. And I really encourage you to pick up a copy because it is a gift. It's a gift, I believe, to everyone who reads it, and it's a gift to be a part of it. So thank you for listening. I am your host, Reverend Ariel Patricia. And until next time, as always, you know what I'm going to say. I encourage you to write your sacred story well.